Have you ever heard a story where a broken engine changed the course of three lives? Where a jet that shouldn't have landed led to a love that never wanted to take off? This is not just a romance. It's a story about second chances, the quiet strength of kindness, and what happens when a woman who has everything meets a man who's lost almost all, but still shows up with a wrench and a good heart. Wings of Grace is a love story, yes. But more than that, it's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful miracles come not with lightning, but with quiet, steady hands. And before we dive into the story, if you love heartfelt tales that restore your faith in people, in love, and in life itself, be sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss a moment of the journey. Now take a deep breath. Let's begin. A poor mechanic repaired a private jet on the tarmac. Its owner asked to marry him on the spot. The hum of jet engines had long faded into the background of Ethan Cole's life. He didn't notice them anymore. Not the roar of takeoffs, not the groan of landings, not even the idle purr of private jets gliding across the tarmac. What he did notice were the little things: a tremor in the stabilizer bracket, the flicker of a faulty fuse, the way morning frost clung to a fuel line like a stubborn memory. It was just after 6 a.m., the sun barely nudging over the horizon, painting the small town of Silverton in muted gold. The air smelled of metal and morning dew. Ethan's hands, roughened by years of labor and loss, cradled a worn thermos of lukewarm coffee as he leaned against the open hangar door. Another day of checking bolts and patching up crop dusters. Another day of quiet. "Daddy, look, my plane has wings now." The voice rang like a bell in the open air. Ethan turned, a slow smile breaking through his otherwise still features. His daughter Lily stood proudly by a cardboard and duct tape airplane, its wings fashioned from cereal boxes and boundless imagination. She was 8, bright-eyed, endlessly curious, and the only reason Ethan got out of bed most mornings. He walked over and crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "That's some fine engineering. FAA might want to certify this one." Lily giggled, flashing the toothy smile that reminded him so much of her mother. "Can we fly it after school? We'll give it a test flight, maybe even fix the rudder this time." A crackling voice buzzed through the radio clipped to Ethan's belt. "Ethan, you there? We've got a situation. Private jet coming in, unscheduled landing. Minor emergency. Pilot says engine stutter." Ethan straightened. "On my way." He ruffled Lily's hair, then jogged toward the hangar, coffee forgotten, mind already calculating possibilities. Unscheduled landings were rare in sleepy Silverton. Private jets, almost unheard of. By the time the sleek, silver Gulfstream touched down, Ethan was already out on the tarmac. Tools in hand, heart calm, senses alert. The plane taxied to a halt, and within moments 2 sharply dressed crew members descended, tension etched into their brows. "The pilot said there was an intermittent engine warning light," one of them explained. "He thought it might be a sensor, but we didn't want to risk continuing." Ethan nodded, already moving. "Pop the hatch. Let's take a look." The work came naturally. His hands knew what to do before his mind caught up. He moved like someone who had once belonged to something greater, someone who had once stood beside the brightest minds in aviation. That life felt like 100 years ago, buried beneath bills, grief, and single-parent laundry nights. 15 minutes in, he found it. A cracked manifold gasket just shy of catastrophic failure. The fact that the pilot caught the warning was sheer luck, or grace. Ethan worked fast, fingers precise, brow furrowed in the morning light. "You're not part of the crew," a voice said behind him, cool and curious. He turned, socket wrench still in hand. The woman standing before him looked out of place among grease-stained tarmac and wind-tugged work coats. She was elegance wrapped in a gray silk blouse, tailored pants, and a gaze that didn't flinch. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Hair pulled into a deliberate chignon. She held herself like someone used to being listened to. "No, ma'am," Ethan said, brushing a smear of oil from his forearm. "I'm maintenance. Ethan Cole." She extended a hand. "Charlotte West." He froze for half a second. That Charlotte West? Founder and CEO of Westmark Ventures, headliner in Forbes, the kind of woman who walked into boardrooms and changed the temperature of the room. What was she doing in Silverton? He shook her hand. Firm grip. Warm, Human. You fixed it already? She asked, looking toward the open panel. Temporary patch. You'll need a full replacement soon, but it'll fly safe. I wouldn't let my daughter near a plane if I wasn't sure. Something in her expression flickered. You have a daughter? Lily, she's 8, thinks cardboard can get us to the moon. Charlotte smiled, small, but real. I used to think that too. There was a pause, just long enough for the wind to shift and bring the scent of wild grass from the edge of the runway. Ethan reached for his wrench again, but she didn't move. You saved us a lot of time, and possibly more, she said. Would you join me for a cup of coffee inside? I owe you that much. He hesitated. It wasn't her offer that gave him pause, but the quiet pull in his chest. The last time a woman looked at him like that, with interest and kindness wrapped together, was before the accident. Since then, he'd lived in a world that ran parallel to people like Charlotte West. I've got to get Lily to school soon, he said. She can come. I'd like to meet the girl who believes in cardboard wings. Ethan almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he gave a small nod. All right, but it's just coffee. Charlotte smiled again. For now. As they walked toward the terminal, Lily ran up and grabbed his hand. Daddy, was that your boss? No, Ethan said, glancing sideways at Charlotte. But she might be something important. In the sky above, a lone bird soared across the rising sun, wings spread wide, chasing nothing but the wind. Ethan never liked terminals. They were too clean, too bright, too full of people going somewhere. Airports, especially this one, were built for transition, just not the kind he had in mind. He preferred the hangars, the mechanics' bay, the smell of oil and solder, the company of machines that didn't need conversation to be understood. But now here he was, sitting in the small polished cafe tucked into the east wing of Silverton Regional, across from Charlotte West, who sipped black coffee like she wasn't the most powerful person to step foot in this place all year. Lily sat beside him, legs swinging under the seat, her crayon-gripped fingers busy coloring the paper placemat. The waitress had offered her a kid's menu with a maze shaped like a jet, which she'd finished in under 2 minutes. Charlotte leaned slightly across the table. So, Ethan, do you fix every plane that drops out of the sky, or just the ones with VIPs on board? He raised an eyebrow, catching the playful tone. Depends on the attitude of the pilot. She smiled. Ours was surprisingly humble. He nodded. They usually are, when gravity reminds them who's boss. A pause settled between them, not uncomfortable but weighty. Ethan looked past her, out through the tall glass windows to the runway. The Gulf Stream sat idle in the distance, glinting under the morning sun. I looked you up, Charlotte said casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. Ethan's gaze snapped back to her. You what? Well, you're hard to find. No social media, no online footprint. But I found a mention, 10 years ago. NASA internship, full scholarship, dual degrees in aerospace engineering and applied mechanics. You were kind of a big deal. Ethan stared at her, coffee halfway to his lips. That was a long time ago. But it was you. Yeah, he said quietly, setting the cup down. It was. Charlotte didn't press. She just watched him the way a pilot watches a dark cloud bank, patiently, cautiously, sensing there's more than meets the eye. Lily looked up. My daddy builds the best paper airplanes. One time it flew all the way from our porch to the mailbox. Charlotte turned to her with a grin. That's impressive. Maybe I should hire him for design. Succatur. Too late, Lily said, folding her arms in mock defiance. He works for me. Ethan chuckled. My toughest boss yet. The waitress came by with refills, and for a moment, silence returned. It was Charlotte who broke it, her voice softer this time. Can I ask why you stopped? Ethan looked at her, not quite startled, but not ready either. He didn't answer right away. Life happened, he said finally, tracing the rim of his coffee cup. My wife, Sarah, passed away 3 years ago. Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. She was coming home from work. Charlotte's face sobered, her fingers curling slightly around her mug. I'm so sorry. I left everything after that, he continued. The research lab, the promotions, the future. Lily was 5. She needed stability. And I needed to feel like I could still fix something. Charlotte's expression shifted. Not pity, but something gentler. Respect. Connection. I get it, she said. When my mother passed, I buried myself in work. It was easier to keep climbing than to look down and see how far I'd fallen. Ethan studied her, surprised. You don't strike me as someone who ever fell. She gave a quiet laugh. That's because I never stopped moving long enough for anyone to see the cracks. The cafe grew quieter as the early rush faded. Outside, the sun lifted higher over the horizon. Time, it seemed, was choosing to linger a little longer for them. Why Silverton? Ethan asked, shifting the subject. Emergency landing, like I said, Charlotte replied. We were headed to Denver for a business summit. The jet flagged a warning light. My pilot insisted we land immediately. Well, he was right to, Ethan said. That gasket could have blown at cruising altitude. You'd have lost pressure. Maybe worse. Charlotte didn't flinch. I'm glad we landed here then. He wasn't sure what to make of her tone. Grateful, almost wistful. It felt heavier than the words should have carried. I should get Lily to school, Ethan said, glancing at his watch. Charlotte nodded, standing. Of course, thank you. For the coffee, and for not letting my jet fall out of the sky. He gave a half smile. All in a day's work. As they walked out, Charlotte paused near the glass doors, where the sunlight spilled in like golden molasses. She turned to Lily. Hey, Captain, she said, kneeling so their eyes were level. You keep designing those airplanes, okay? Maybe one day you'll build one your daddy can't fix. Lily giggled. Not possible. I believe you, Charlotte said with a wink. Then to Ethan, if it's not too much trouble, I'd like to stop by the hangar later. I'm grounded for a few hours while the replacement parts are flown in. Maybe I can see the kind of machines you really love. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He gave a small nod instead. Sure, come by anytime. As Charlotte walked away, her heels clicking softly on the terminal floor, Ethan watched her go with a puzzled look, like someone trying to figure out why a bird had landed in his yard after a long flight from places he'd never been. He took Lily's hand, and they stepped out into the crisp morning, unaware that the course of their lives had just begun to shift, like wind catching the edge of a wing. Ethan had no idea what he expected when Charlotte West said she'd stop by the hangar. Maybe a polite wave from the back seat of a black town car, or a brief appearance flanked by assistants, phone in one hand, latte in the other. What he didn't expect was her walking in alone, just after 10, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail that made her seem younger. Almost familiar. You're early, Ethan said, glancing up from under the nose of a prop plane he'd been rewiring. She shrugged. I figured billionaires are allowed to break a few scheduling rules. You're lucky I'm charging by the smile, he replied. Charlotte laughed, a short, genuine burst that echoed slightly off the metal walls. I could afford a few then. He stood, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. You really wanted to see a hangar? I really wanted a break from emails and leather-bound conference rooms. Besides, you mentioned machines you love. I'm curious what kind of devotion looks like in your world. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Well, they don't talk back. That's a start. She stepped closer, eyeing the dusty tools, the half-dismantled engines, the meticulous chaos that only someone like Ethan would understand. This is your cathedral, isn't it? He blinked. That's a poetic way of putting it. Charlotte ran a finger along the curve of an old piston head. You find peace here. It's honest work, he said. When something's broken, you fix it. No politics, no spin, just parts and purpose. She looked at him a moment longer, then nodded. I envy that. Ethan gestured toward a small table tucked in the corner, where a coffee pot and two mismatched mugs sat under the dim glow of a utility lamp. Can I offer you something fancier than terminal coffee? She smiled. Only if it comes with a story. He poured, handed her a chipped mug with an old NASA logo, and sat across from her. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt like two people watching a fire, letting it warm the space between them without rushing it. You said you used to believe in cardboard wings, Ethan said at last. Charlotte took a sip, then stared into her mug. When I was little, my mom used to take me to the airport every Sunday. Not to fly anywhere. We couldn't afford that. She'd just park near the runway and we'd watch planes take off. She'd say, Those people are headed to somewhere new. One day you will be too. Ethan leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She was, Charlotte said, her voice softer now. She passed when I was 21. Cancer. Fast and cruel. I'm sorry, Charlotte nodded. After she died, I threw myself into work. Graduated early, got the first job I could in finance, climbed every ladder I saw. Before I knew it, I was building my own ladders, but I stopped looking up somewhere along the way. Ethan tilted his head. And today, she met his eyes. Today I saw a man fix a plane with hands steady enough to land a bird. I saw a little girl who believes her father can make anything fly. And I remembered what it felt like to believe in things. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't. Some truths didn't need answers. They just needed a place to land. Charlotte finished her coffee and stood. I should get back. They're flying in the new gasket. We'll be in the air by late afternoon. He nodded, not trusting himself to say more. At the door, she paused. Can I ask you something? Sure. If you ever had the chance to do it all again, engineer, NASA, big cities, bright lights, would you take it? Ethan thought of Lily's drawing taped above his workbench, the one with stick figures and a cardboard plane, and how she wrote "Me and Daddy" in rainbow letters underneath. He met Charlotte's gaze. Not if it meant losing what I've got now. She didn't smile, but her eyes did. I figured you'd say that. As she walked away, the hangar felt quieter than before. Ethan turned back to the plane, but his hands moved slower, distracted. Something had shifted, like a new current underneath calm water. Just as he reached for a wrench, a voice called from the doorway. I almost forgot, Charlotte said, holding up a folded napkin. Lily gave me this. She told me not to peek until I left. She opened it, and her expression changed in an instant. There, scribbled in crayon, was a picture of Charlotte with angel wings, standing beside Ethan and Lily. Above their heads, Lily had written in shaky handwriting, "The lady who fell from the sky." Charlotte looked up, eyes glossy. Ethan cleared his throat. She's got a thing for metaphors. Charlotte shook her head slowly. No, she's just better at seeing people than most adults I know. She slipped the drawing into her purse like it was made of glass. Thank her for me, will you? I will. And with that, she was gone. Ethan stood there for a long moment, then looked up at the open hangar ceiling, where the rafters framed a patch of perfect blue sky. The hum of the engines returned like an old song, familiar, constant, a kind of mechanical lullaby that Charlotte West used to love. But this time, sitting alone in the back of her Gulfstream as it soared over the mountains toward Denver, she felt an unfamiliar weight in her chest. Not anxiety, not fear, something quieter, heavier. She held the napkin in her lap, the one with Lily's drawing. Crayon colors had bled slightly into the fabric, softening the bold lines of wings and smiles and the words, "The lady who fell from the sky." It should have made her laugh. It nearly did, but instead it stirred something deep and long buried, a longing she hadn't felt in years. Charlotte folded the napkin carefully, then placed it inside her leather-bound planner, between stock reports and boardroom minutes. The juxtaposition felt absurd and oddly perfect. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. We're about 20 minutes out, Ms. West. She leaned back in her seat and stared out the window. Mountains unfolded beneath her like a great green quilt stitched with light. Clouds drifted like lazy thoughts, but Charlotte's mind wasn't on the landscape. It was on a hangar in Silverton, on a little girl with bright eyes, and on a man who fixed planes as if they mattered more than time. She couldn't stop thinking about his hands. Not because of how they looked, scarred, strong, steady, but because of how they moved, with purpose, with care. In a world that often rushed and roared, Ethan Cole was a still point, and that stillness had unsettled something inside her. Charlotte had grown used to noise. She thrived in it. For over a decade, she'd conquered boardrooms, reshaped companies, and turned failing ventures into gold. She was the woman who never blinked in negotiations, who slept 4 hours a night and drank her coffee cold because there was never time to finish it hot. And yet, for all her success, no one had asked her, really asked her, how she was in a very long time. Ethan didn't ask either, but somehow she felt like he already knew. Later that evening, in her Denver penthouse suite, Charlotte stood barefoot on her balcony, watching the city lights blink like distant galaxies. The skyline was impressive, sharp edges and clean lines against a twilight canvas, but it felt sterile. She poured herself a glass of red wine and settled into a chair beside a small herb garden she barely remembered planting. She'd meant to cook more, meant to live more, meant to stop waiting for someday. Her assistant Rachel called just as she took a sip. "How was the landing?" Rachel asked, her voice clipped, efficient. "Safe. Minor issue. Handled well. I've rerouted the Denver schedule and rescheduled your keynote for tomorrow. And Charlotte, Forbes wants to do a profile next month. Women who build empires. They want exclusive shots in your office and the plane." Charlotte exhaled slowly. "Tell them yes, but only if they agree to feature our scholarship program too. I'm tired of smiling next to stock tickers." Rachel paused. "Are you okay?" Charlotte blinked. That question again, twice in one day. Strange. "I'm fine," she said. "Just tired." "Understood. I'll email final details by morning." Charlotte ended the call, set her phone face down, and stared into the dark. In the quiet that followed, she found herself reaching, not for the wine, but for the folded napkin. She unfolded it slowly, as if it might dissolve under her touch. There was something innocent about it, unfiltered. A child's belief that the woman who stepped off the jet could be someone magical, someone kind, someone who belonged. When had she last felt like she belonged? Maybe never. She thought about her father, a man of ambition, cold and polished like the mahogany desk he never left. He taught her everything about money, about leverage, about playing to win, but he never taught her how to be still, how to be present, how to love. Her mother had tried to counterbalance that, with warmth, with stories, with afternoon drives to the airport where they'd sit for hours, dreaming aloud. "I'll fly one day," Charlotte used to whisper, forehead pressed to the car window. "You won't just fly, sweetheart," her mother would reply. "You'll soar." But soaring had come at a price, and somewhere along the climb, Charlotte had traded dreams for deadlines. Tonight, though, the memory of Ethan's quiet voice, of Lily's small hand in his, of the way the hangar smelled like earth and oil and something permanent, it all felt more real than the luxury surrounding her now. She stood and stepped back inside. The suite felt cavernous, unnecessary. She reached for her phone and hesitated. "Don't. It's a bad idea." But her fingers moved anyway, pulling up the airport's public website. A quick search led her to a tucked-away tab. Silverton Regional Aviation Services. And there he was, Ethan Cole, maintenance lead. No photo, just a short, blunt bio. Specialist in aircraft mechanics, safety inspections, and avionics repair. 15-plus years experience. FAA certified. No bragging. No fluff. But the last line caught her. "Proud father of one. Believer in second chances." Charlotte stared at the words. Her eyes blurred slightly. She locked her phone and walked to her bedroom, pausing only to tuck the drawing beneath her pillow. That night, for the first time in years, Charlotte West slept with the window open and dreamed of cardboard wings. The plane touched down in Silverton 3 days later, this time without emergency. Charlotte had told herself it was business, a routine check-in, a follow-up with airport management, maybe a donation to the underfunded local aviation program. She'd even typed up a brief itinerary to justify the trip to Rachel. Meetings, numbers, objectives. But the truth was simpler, quieter. She just wanted to see Ethan again. The runway shimmered in the late morning sun, heat rising from the tarmac like whispers. As the Gulf Stream rolled to a gentle stop, Charlotte adjusted her sunglasses and glanced down at the simple silver chain around her neck. Lily had gifted it to her. Well, loaned, it was the word she'd used, when Charlotte had said goodbye the last time. It held a tiny paper airplane charm. "For luck," the girl had said with a grin, "and just in case you forget how to fly." Charlotte hadn't taken it off since. The door opened. No red carpet, no flashing cameras, just the same dusty tarmac, the same soft breeze that had carried something unexpected into her life days ago. And there he was. Ethan stood beside the hangar, wiping his hands on a rag, as if he'd been expecting her. He hadn't. She knew that. But the way he looked at her, with a small, curious smile that didn't reach too far, told her he wasn't surprised either. She walked toward him, heels replaced this time by flats. The wind tugged at her blouse and she let it. "You really came back," he said, voice half amusement, half wonder. "Had to make sure you didn't start charging me rent for using your hangar," she replied. He chuckled. "I was considering it, but then I remembered I already got paid in crayon." Charlotte smiled, feeling the tension melt away faster than she could control. "Lily gave me her artwork. I figured the least I could do is return the favor." Ethan raised a brow. "You brought something?" She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small worn notebook. On the front cover, Westmark Ventures, Women in Aviation Scholarship Fund. She handed it to him. "I started this after our last conversation," she said, "in honor of my mother, and honestly, of you, of Lily." Ethan turned the notebook over in his hands. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "Just know it's real. We're starting small, 5 scholarships next year for girls in underfunded districts. But it's growing, and I want your town to be the first we visit." He nodded slowly. "You're serious?" Charlotte looked him straight in the eye. Dead serious. A pause, then, "Thank you." It wasn't just gratitude she heard in his voice. It was something else. Respect, maybe. Or something deeper. She glanced around the hangar. "Where's Lily?" "School. Science fair today. She's building a hovercraft from an old leaf blower in pure chaos." Charlotte laughed. "I'd pay to see that. You might get your chance. She asked this morning if Miss Charlotte from the sky was ever coming to dinner." Charlotte hesitated, surprised by the warmth that bloomed in her chest. "Dinner? She's determined to make you spaghetti. I warned her you're probably used to lobster and 5-star dining, but she says everyone likes noodles." Charlotte grinned. "She's right." Ethan studied her for a moment. "You free tonight?" There was no flirtation in his tone, just openness, a question without pressure, a welcome without obligation. "I am now," she said. That evening, Charlotte stood nervously in front of Ethan's small, weathered home, holding a bottle of wine and questioning, for the first time in years, what one wore to a mechanic's house for dinner with his daughter. The door opened before she knocked. Lily's face lit up like sunrise. "You came! I promised, didn't I?" Charlotte stepped inside. The house was modest but full of warmth. Photos of Sarah lined the hallway, next to crayon masterpieces and school awards. The kitchen smelled like garlic and oregano. And Ethan, well, he looked completely at home, tossing pasta with the ease of a man who'd found peace in the simple rhythm of family. Dinner was a joyful kind of chaos. Lily told stories about science, fair mishaps, and her future as an aviation artist. Charlotte listened, laughed, and, for the first time in a long time, felt like a guest, not a figure. After dessert, store-bought cookies that Lily insisted were gourmet, Ethan offered Charlotte coffee. They sat on the back porch while Lily watched cartoons inside. The stars above Silverton came out one by one, no city lights to compete with them, just sky and silence, and 2 people unsure of what came next, but suddenly less afraid to wonder. "You seem different," Ethan said softly. Charlotte wrapped her hands around her mug. "I feel different. Irrational because of a plane that almost didn't fly? Because of what I found when it landed." Ethan looked at her, the quiet of the night folding around them like a blanket. "You're welcome here. You know that, right?" She nodded. "I didn't before, but I do now." They sat in silence for a long while, letting the wind move through the trees, letting time slow just enough to matter. Inside, Lily's laughter rang out. Charlotte smiled at the sound. It wasn't business that had brought her back. It wasn't guilt or curiosity. It was something she couldn't name yet, but it felt like the start of flight. It was quiet after Lily went to bed. The kind of quiet that only exists in small towns and healing hearts. Ethan and Charlotte sat on the front porch, 2 mismatched rocking chairs creaking gently beneath them. A breeze rustled the leaves in the maple tree above, and the sky wore its blanket of stars with the same easy confidence as a man who had nothing left to prove. Charlotte sipped her coffee slowly, the ceramic mug warm in her hands. "It's strange," she said after a long pause, "how you can live with silence for so long and not realize how much noise you've been carrying inside." Ethan glanced sideways at her, his profile softened by the porch light. Most people are louder on the inside than out. It's just easier to pretend otherwise. She nodded. You're right. I've spent years in rooms full of applause, and not once did I hear anything as honest as what I've heard here. In your home, your shop, from Lily. Ethan looked down at his hands, fingers still smudged with grease despite 2 washes. She has a way of cutting through the noise. Her mom was like that too. Charlotte's gaze settled on him. Do you miss her? Every day, he said simply. There was no tremble in his voice, no dramatic pause, just fact, truth. It landed softly but with weight. He leaned back in his chair. Sarah was the kind of woman who made you believe the world still had beauty left in it. She'd laugh in places other people stayed silent. She remembered everyone's birthday, and she had a thing for really bad 80s love ballads. A small smile played on his lips. We used to dance in the kitchen while spaghetti boiled over. Charlotte pictured it vividly. Steam, laughter, music playing low on a kitchen radio, Lily dancing on her mother's toes. She passed 3 days before Christmas, Ethan continued, voice lower now. I got the call at work. Drunk driver ran a red light. Sarah was bringing home gingerbread cookie kits for Lily's school party. She never even saw it coming. Charlotte instinctively reached over, resting her hand gently on his arm. I'm so sorry. Ethan didn't pull away. He just nodded. After that, I couldn't look at a plane, couldn't look at the stars. I left the lab, the projects, the dreams. Moved back here where it was small, manageable, real. You gave it all up? She asked. I gave up everything but Lily, he said, because losing Sarah taught me what really matters. And it wasn't prestige or patents. It was bedtime stories and scraped knees. It was the way Lily's face lights up when I make her pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. Charlotte smiled, though her eyes were damp. And now? I'm still figuring that out, he said, glancing at her. But the noise isn't as loud anymore. She was quiet for a moment, then softly. My mother died when I was 21. Ethan turned slightly toward her. She was sunshine, Charlotte said, the kind of person who left a trail of kindness behind her like perfume. She used to tell me that being kind wasn't about being soft. It was about being strong enough to care. That sounds like something Sarah would have said. My father, he didn't handle grief well. Or maybe he never really learned how to love without conditions. He poured all his energy into business. And when Mom was gone, he expected me to do the same. To be sharp, ambitious, untouchable. Ethan listened, not with sympathy, but with presence. I rose fast, she continued, first in my firm, then in venture capital. Built my own fund by 32. Won awards, sat on panels, gave speeches. But I stopped feeling. I traded connection for control. She took a breath, voice steady but fragile. And then I landed in Silverton, on a tarmac I couldn't pronounce, staring at a man who fixed things with quiet hands and no ego. And I realized I haven't felt safe in years. Ethan didn't speak. He just looked at her, and she felt seen. Not as a CEO or a figurehead, but as a woman who had long stopped believing she could put her guard down. I don't know what this is, she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. Us. This moment. This pull I keep feeling every time I see you. But I know it's not nothing. Ethan's reply was low, warm. It's not nothing. The silence that followed was filled with more than words could carry. It held understanding, loss, hope, and something still unnamed. Ethan stood, offered his hand. Walk with me? Charlotte placed her hand in his, surprised by how natural it felt. They walked down the gravel driveway, past wildflowers and Lily's half-finished chalk drawings. The moon lit their path, and with every step, Charlotte felt something inside her loosen. At the edge of the property, they stopped. I've been afraid, she said, barely louder than the wind. So have I, Ethan replied. But maybe that means we're close to something worth not running from. She looked up at him then. Really looked. His face wasn't flawless. It was weathered, sun-worn, lined with life, and to her it had never looked more beautiful. I don't know how to do this slowly, Charlotte said. I'm either all in, or I disappear. Ethan's hand tightened gently around hers. Then stay. We'll go slow together. The night didn't need a kiss. Not yet. It was too early for fireworks, too sacred for performance. But as they stood there, two broken, beautiful people beneath an open sky, it was clear something had begun. Something real. The envelope arrived in the mail 2 days later. Ivory cardstock, gold embossing, heavy with intention. Ethan turned it over in his hands, skeptical. He wasn't used to paper that weighed more than the tools in his apron. Lily, on the other hand, nearly exploded with excitement. Is it a treasure map? A secret agent letter? Open it, Daddy! Open it! With a chuckle, Ethan peeled it open carefully, as if it might bite. Inside was a thick cream-colored card that read, "You are cordially invited to the Westmark Foundation Autumn Gala. Saturday, 6 p.m. Denver, CO. Formal attire required." At the bottom, in softer handwriting, "Please come. Both of you. Charlotte." Ethan blinked. Lily clapped her hands. "We're going to a ball, like Cinderella." "Not quite," Ethan muttered, rereading the words as if they might change. "It's a charity gala. Do we get to dance?" "I don't know. Will Charlotte be there?" He smiled despite himself. "I think she might be the one hosting." Lily ran off to her room to find her fanciest dress, which was covered in glitter and 2 sizes too small. Ethan, meanwhile, sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the invitation. This wasn't his world. Galas, tuxedos, words like cordially. The last time he'd worn a suit was at Sarah's funeral, and it still hung in the back of his closet like a relic from a past life. And yet, he remembered the night Charlotte had sat on his porch, barefoot, sipping coffee and bearing her soul beneath the stars. Maybe this was her way of letting him in. Maybe it was his turn to say yes. Saturday evening arrived faster than Ethan would have liked. He stood in front of the mirror, tugging at the stiff collar of the black suit he hadn't worn in years. It still fit, barely. "Dad," Lily said behind him, "you look like James Bond." Ethan turned, startled. She stood in the hallway in a navy blue dress with a little white sash. Her hair was brushed and pinned to one side, and in her hands she clutched a small, sparkly handbag. "You look," Ethan tried to find the right word, "like you're going to break a few hearts tonight." She giggled. "Charlotte gave me this dress. It came in the mail yesterday. She picked navy because she says it's the color of courage." Ethan swallowed hard. He knelt and adjusted Lily's sash. "Well, then you're the bravest girl I know." The hotel in Denver was the kind of place Ethan usually avoided. Marble floors, chandeliers the size of small aircraft, and valet parking that made him feel like he should apologize for his pickup truck. But Lily was buzzing with excitement, practically dragging him through the lobby. Inside the ballroom, everything shimmered. Gold accents, crystal glasses, strings of fairy lights draped from the ceiling like stars. People moved through the space in gowns and suits, laughter mingling with soft chamber music from a live quartet. Ethan felt like a walking oil stain in a sea of polish, until he saw her. Charlotte stood near the stage, radiant in an emerald green dress that shimmered with every step. Her hair was swept up and a small diamond pendant sparkled at her collarbone. But it wasn't the dress or the lights that caught him. It was her eyes, soft, certain, looking for him. When she spotted them, her whole face lit up. She crossed the room with practiced grace, but the warmth in her smile wasn't rehearsed. "You came," she said. Ethan gestured at the surroundings. "I didn't bring my torque wrench, but I figured we'd blend in." Charlotte laughed. "You're doing just fine." Then she turned to Lily. "You look perfect." Lily twirled. "This dress is the color of courage." Charlotte bent down, whispering, "And you wear it better than anyone I've ever known." Lily beamed, then spotted the dessert table and darted away with a mission in her step. Charlotte turned back to Ethan. "Thank you for saying yes." "I wasn't sure I'd fit in," he said honestly. "You don't have to fit in," she replied. "You just have to be here. That's all I really wanted." He nodded, his hand brushing hers for just a moment, enough to make her breath catch. The lights dimmed then, and a host stepped onto the stage to welcome the crowd. Charlotte moved to the side, but not before whispering, "Stay close. I've got a surprise." An hour later, Ethan found himself standing beside Charlotte near the stage as the room quieted. She stepped forward, taking the microphone with the ease of someone used to commanding attention. But when she spoke, her voice was softer than expected, measured, heartfelt. This year, she began, the Westmark Foundation is proud to launch a new initiative, the Wings of Grace Fund. Murmurs of interest passed through the crowd. This fund will provide scholarships to young girls across rural America who dream of flight, who see possibility not in boardrooms, but in open skies. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Charlotte continued, "This idea came to me not in a board meeting or a brainstorming session, but in a small hangar in Silverton, Colorado. From a man who fixes planes with more care than most people put into entire companies. And from a little girl who gave me a paper airplane and reminded me that believing is an act of courage." She paused, emotion rising. "Tonight, I'd like to thank them." The spotlight swept across the room, settling on Ethan and Lily. Gasps, applause, flashbulbs. Ethan froze. Lily gripped his hand tighter. "Daddy," she whispered, "everyone's looking at us." He knelt beside her, smiling gently. "They're looking because you helped make something fly." Charlotte's eyes met his from the stage, shimmering. There were 1,000 things she couldn't say aloud in front of hundreds, but Ethan heard all of them, and something shifted inside him. Quiet, sure, undeniable. He wasn't outside her world anymore. He was standing in it. The ballroom shimmered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers gleamed overhead, champagne flutes sparkled like stars, and violins painted soft melodies into the air. But Ethan had never felt smaller in his life. He stood near the edge of the crowd, Lily by his side, her fingers sticky from chocolate mousse, eyes wide with wonder. She belonged here in a way he didn't. She belonged everywhere. But him? He tugged at the collar of his shirt, still stiff despite Charlotte's gentle instructions on how to wear a bow tie. He hadn't said a word since the speech, when hundreds of eyes turned toward him, when applause rang out for something he didn't feel like he'd earned. He hadn't changed the world. He'd just done what he always did. Fix something broken, help someone land safely. But maybe that was more than he realized. "Daddy," Lily said, looking up, "why are people staring at us?" "Because your spaghetti recipe is famous now," he replied, forcing a smile. She giggled and wandered toward the dessert table again. Ethan exhaled. "Quite a crowd, huh?" The voice came from behind, a smooth, practiced baritone. Ethan turned to find a tall man in a tuxedo. Perfect posture, perfect teeth. The kind of man who had never gotten oil under his fingernails. The kind of man Ethan used to be. Almost. "I'm Mark Halston," the man said, extending a hand. "Charlotte and I go way back, business partners on a few ventures." Ethan shook his hand, firm, short. "You must be the mechanic." Ethan stiffened slightly. "Ethan Cole." Mark smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Quite the leap, from wrenches to Westmark galas." Ethan gave a polite nod. "Not exactly my usual Saturday night," Mark chuckled. "No offense, but you do look a bit like a fish out of water." "No offense," Ethan echoed, but the words sat heavy. Mark swirled his drink, eyes scanning the room. "Charlotte's full of surprises. One month she's restructuring biotech companies in New York. The next she's launching scholarship funds with guys in flannel shirts. You must have made quite the impression." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. Mark leaned in, voice dropping. "Just a word of advice, friend to friend. Charlotte's got a lot riding on her image. She can afford to be generous, sure. But long term, she lives in a different orbit. Don't mistake a moment for a lifetime." Before Ethan could respond, Mark clinked glasses with someone across the room and disappeared into the crowd. Charlotte appeared a few minutes later, radiant, flushed from speaking, eyes searching for him. "There you are," she said. "I've been looking all over." "I noticed." She tilted her head, reading his tone. "You okay?" Ethan hesitated. "I just had an interesting conversation." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "With who?" "Mark Halston." Her lips thinned. "He's worried about your image," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. Charlotte sighed. "He's always been territorial about his brand of success. And you? What about me? Do you care what they think? What they whisper behind your back when you invite someone like me to stand in the spotlight?" Charlotte took a step closer. "Ethan, because I do," he said more sharply than he meant to. "I care. Not for me, but for Lily. I don't want her caught in a story where she doesn't belong." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. Then, do you really think that's what this is? A story she doesn't belong in? He didn't answer. She folded her arms, voice calm but firm. I didn't bring you here to prove anything. I brought you because I wanted you with me. Because you matter. Ethan looked down. It's hard to feel like I matter in a room full of people who see right through me. Charlotte softened. Then let me help you see what I see. I'm not a project, Charlotte, he said, and I'm not a cause. Her face stilled, a flicker of hurt passing through her expression. I never thought you were. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. This isn't easy for me. It's not easy for me either. They stood there, the music swelling between them like a curtain. I should get Lily, Ethan said. It's late. Charlotte nodded, stepping aside. He didn't say goodbye. She didn't stop him. But when he looked back once from the ballroom doors, she was still standing in the same spot, alone, radiant, uncertain. The drive back to Silverton was silent. Lily fell asleep in the back seat, her curls pressed against the window, her mouth open just slightly in the innocence of dreams. Ethan kept one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the edge of the steering column too tightly. He wasn't angry at Charlotte. Not really, he was angry at himself, for wanting something he wasn't sure he could have, for thinking that just maybe this time, love could land safely, for forgetting that even the best flights begin with turbulence. Back in Denver, Charlotte stood on her balcony, the city sparkling beneath her. She had taken off the emerald dress and let her hair down, but nothing could quiet the ache in her chest. She replayed Ethan's words again and again. I'm not a project. I'm not a cause. He had misunderstood her, or maybe she had misunderstood herself. But underneath the tension, the hurt, the missteps, she still wanted him there. Not because he made her feel strong, but because he made her feel real. And in a world where everything glittered, that was the rarest gift of all. The silence in the hangar was different now. It used to be the kind of quiet that comforted Ethan, filled with the subtle rhythms of his work, the occasional ping of metal, the hum of potential. But today it felt hollow, too still. The following Monday he'd come in early, hoping the mechanic's bay would offer its usual refuge. Instead, every bolt he turned echoed louder than it should have. Every familiar tool in his hand felt foreign. He hadn't heard from Charlotte since the gala, and he hadn't reached out either. She hadn't done anything wrong. Not really. But something had shifted that night, something he couldn't shake. Her world, all polished edges and spotlight smiles, had cast a harsh light on the worn, ordinary corners of his own. And Mark Halston's words, though slick and smug, still rang in his head like a warning bell. Don't mistake a moment for a lifetime. Ethan didn't blame Charlotte for inviting him into her orbit. But maybe that was the problem. He was just visiting. She lived there. He was a brief interruption in the flow of her brilliance. Sooner or later, the jet would take off without him. He set down his wrench and stared out at the runway. The morning sun shimmered on the tarmac, but he barely noticed. Daddy? He turned. Lily stood at the door in her denim jacket, a paper bag clutched in one hand. Her hair was slightly messy. He'd forgotten to braid it that morning. You okay, Bug? She nodded, but her eyes narrowed. You forgot my field trip form. Ethan winced. Right. I'll bring it by school later, promise. Lily walked toward him, pulling something from her jacket. This came for you. It was a letter, handwritten on thick paper. No envelope. He opened it carefully. Ethan, I'm sorry for the weight of that night. Not for what I said, but for how it made you feel. I didn't invite you to stand beside me because I needed you to be someone else. I invited you because you're already more than enough. If you need space, I'll give it. But know that I miss you, both of you. See, Ethan folded the note slowly, then tucked it into his shirt pocket. He looked at Lily, who watched him carefully. Do you miss her? He didn't need to ask who. Lily nodded. She made me feel sparkly, like I was part of something big. Ethan crouched in front of her. You are part of something big. To me. What, chubby, but I want to be part of something big with her too. That landed like a stone in his chest. Children didn't need nuance. They knew what they felt. And they spoke the truth, even when it hurt. That evening, Charlotte stared at her phone for the 10th time that hour. No reply. She'd sent the note through a courier, too afraid that a text message would feel small, too impersonal for what she was trying to say. She hadn't told Rachel or anyone at the office what happened. She didn't have the words. All she knew was that the days since the gala felt longer. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary, now echoed with absence. She'd built an empire from scratch. She could close deals across continents, but she couldn't fix what had cracked between her and Ethan. Not with control, not with charm, only with honesty. And maybe that's what scared her most, how vulnerable she felt when she was just herself. Her phone buzzed. A text. Rachel, your presence is requested for a dinner next week with the Denver Chamber of Commerce. Black tie. They want you to keynote. Charlotte stared at the message, then typed back, Charlotte, please decline. Rachel, are you sure? This is a major PR opportunity. Charlotte, I'm sure. I'm going to Silverton. There was a long pause. Rachel, is that the small airport town? Charlotte, it's more than that. Charlotte tossed the phone aside and stood. She walked to her closet, not to pick an outfit for a boardroom, but to grab a sweater, jeans, and her walking shoes. If Ethan needed space, he'd have it, but she wasn't going to vanish. Not without showing him that she wasn't just a woman from the sky. She was someone willing to land and stay. The next morning, Ethan stood at the school drop-off lane, watching Lily run toward her class, waving back at him with a grin. His phone buzzed. It was a photo. Charlotte, in hiking boots and a ponytail, standing outside the coffee shop in downtown Silverton, holding two mugs. Caption, one for me, one in case you show up. Ethan stared at the screen, and for the first time in days, he smiled. It wasn't over. It might not be simple, but it wasn't over. Not yet. It started with a fever. At first, Ethan thought it was just a long day at school, a bit too much sugar at the science fair, or maybe nerves about an upcoming spelling test. Lily didn't complain. She rarely did, but her cheeks were flushed, and by evening, she was quieter than usual. Hey, Bug, he said, placing the back of his hand on her forehead. You're burning up. She blinked at him sleepily from the couch, her little voice dry. I'm okay, Daddy. I just feel like my insides are walking slowly. He forced a smile. We'll get you cooled down. Just rest, okay? But as the night crept in, so did the worry. Her temperature climbed. She began to shiver, then sweat. He tried everything. Cool claws, fluids, reading her favorite book in his softest voice. But nothing worked. Her skin stayed hot, and her breathing grew shallow. By midnight, Ethan couldn't pretend anymore. He scooped her up, wrapped her in a blanket, and drove through the quiet streets of Silverton, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The hospital was small, but familiar. He'd been here once before, 3 years ago, on a night that had split his world in two. That night, they hadn't been able to save Sarah. Tonight, he needed them to save Lily. He didn't let himself panic, not outwardly. He answered the nurse's questions, filled out the forms, and kept one hand on Lily's arm as they wheeled her back for tests. But inside, he was unraveling. He sat alone in the waiting room, staring at a poster about childhood vaccinations, trying not to picture all the ways a fever could spiral out of control. That's when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned, stunned. Charlotte stood behind him, dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, no makeup, her hair pulled into a messy knot. She looked like she'd come straight from sleep, or hadn't slept at all. I saw your truck outside, she said softly. Rachel texted me after she saw a local report that the hospital had admitted a child tonight. I had a feeling. He couldn't speak. He just stared at her, his face caught between shock and the thinly veiled desperation of a parent. Can I sit with you? She asked. He nodded. She sat beside him, their shoulders barely touching. How is she? She whispered. They don't know yet, he replied. His voice was hoarse. Her fever's high. She was shaking. She said she felt like her insides were walking slowly. Charlotte smiled gently. That sounds like something Lily would say. Ethan let out a breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. She's tougher than me. I know, Charlotte said. She's the bravest person I've ever met. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the vending machine and soft footsteps of night nurses the only sounds around them. Ethan rubbed his hands together, then clasped them tightly to stop the shaking. I was so scared, he admitted. Not just tonight. I mean, everything. Since the gala. Since you. Charlotte looked at him, her eyes soft. Why? He hesitated. Because I've already lost one world. I didn't think I could survive losing another. Loving someone again, it felt like tempting fate. She reached over, took one of his hands in hers. I wasn't asking you to risk everything, Ethan. I was asking you to trust me, to let me walk with you, on your terms. He met her gaze. But what if I don't belong in your world? She squeezed his hand. You don't, and I don't belong in yours. He blinked. We don't belong in either of our old worlds anymore, she continued. Maybe we're supposed to build a new one. Together. He didn't know what to say. He only knew that something inside him had finally let go. A nurse appeared. Mr. Cole. He stood so fast the chair nearly tipped. She's stable, the nurse said with a kind smile. Just a viral fever. We're keeping her overnight for fluids and monitoring, but she's already asking about spaghetti. Ethan let out a breath so deep it felt like he was exhaling 3 years of fear. Can I see her? Of course. Just one visitor for now. Ethan turned to Charlotte, unsure what to say. She stepped back. Go. I'll be here. He looked at her, really looked at her. Then impulsively, he leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Thank you. She watched him go, a smile forming slowly, quietly, like something blooming after a long winter. Inside the hospital room, Lily lay under a thin blanket, an IV in her arm and a stuffed owl tucked beside her. Hey, Daddy, she croaked. Hey, Bug. He sat beside her, brushing her hair back gently. Did Charlotte come? She did. Good. Lily closed her eyes. She's part of us now. Ethan's throat tightened. Yeah, he whispered. I think maybe she is. Outside, Charlotte sat on a bench under the canopy of the emergency wing, watching the stars flicker through the haze of hospital lights. She had come here tonight expecting nothing. No forgiveness, no explanation. But she had found something greater. She had found welcome. And with it, she knew. Love wasn't just about showing up when things were perfect. It was about sitting in the waiting room when things were not. The ballroom was twice the size of the one in Denver, but somehow it felt smaller. Not cramped, just more intimate, more purposeful. The Wings of Grace annual fundraiser was in full swing. Candlelight reflected off crystal glasses, and soft jazz mingled with the low hum of voices. Banners draped from the high ceiling bore the foundation's new motto, Give them wings and they'll take the sky. Charlotte stood backstage, waiting for her moment. She wore a simple navy gown, not the most expensive in her closet, but the one she felt most herself in. Her notes were tucked into her clutch, but she hadn't looked at them once. Tonight wasn't about polish, it was about truth. From the wings, she spotted Ethan standing near the back of the room, dressed in a charcoal gray jacket, Lily beside him in a white dress with little blue birds embroidered at the hem. Her curls were tied back with a ribbon Charlotte had picked out herself. They looked right, not perfect, but right. Rachel appeared at her side. You're up in two. Charlotte nodded, exhaled slowly, and stepped toward the light. The MC finished his introduction, mentioning Charlotte's accolades, her leadership, her philanthropy, but she barely heard it. Her heart was louder, and for once, she didn't try to silence it. She walked onto the stage to warm applause, but instead of heading to the podium, she stopped halfway and turned to face the audience directly. Thank you, she began, her voice clear but gentle. Thank you not just for being here, but for seeing what this night truly represents. The room quieted. She had their attention. Some of you know my story. You've watched me climb, win, lose, build, rebuild. But tonight isn't about the woman I've been. It's about the woman I almost forgot how to be. A ripple of curiosity spread through the crowd. Charlotte smiled just a little. A few months ago, my jet made an unscheduled landing in a small town most of you couldn't point to on a map, Silverton, Colorado. There were murmurs of recognition. I thought it was an inconvenience, a delay, a blip, but it became the beginning of something I didn't know I needed. Because in that town, I met a mechanic named Ethan and his daughter, Lily. She looked toward the back of the room. Even from the stage, she could see the surprise in Ethan's eyes and the small, hopeful smile spreading across Lily's face. I expected to leave with a repaired engine, Charlotte continued. Instead, I left with something much more valuable, Perspective. She paced slowly, each word deliberate. I saw what love looks like when it's quiet. I saw what resilience looks like in the hands of a man who gets up every day and fixes what others discard. I saw what courage looks like in the eyes of a little girl who believes that paper airplanes can reach the moon. Laughter. A few soft gasps. I started the Wings of Grace Fund to honor those who dare to dream, especially when the world tells them not to. But the truth is, this fund didn't begin in a boardroom. It began in a hangar. With oil-stained hands, cardboard wings, and a father's quiet devotion. Her voice caught slightly, but she didn't let it fall. I've spent years surrounded by people who measure success in zeros and headlines. But tonight, I want to redefine what success looks like. She paused. It looks like showing up for someone when they're afraid. It looks like making space for love, even when it doesn't make sense on paper. It looks like trusting your heart, even when your head begs you not to. Then with a deep breath, she stepped away from the microphone and walked straight down from the stage. The room turned, followed her with their eyes as she crossed the ballroom floor. Not toward the VIPs, not toward the press, but toward the back, where Ethan stood rooted in place. When she reached him, she looked up into his eyes. You once told me, she said, voice quiet but steady, that you didn't think you belonged in my world. But Ethan, you are my world. She took his hand. Don't let fear decide for us. Please. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't need to. He leaned in and kissed her, gently, without performance, without fear. Just honesty. Just love. Around them, the room erupted in applause. Not polite, not staged. Real. Rachel wiped away a tear in the corner. Lily, beaming, clapped harder than anyone. And somewhere, deep in the heart of two people who had nearly let life convince them to settle for safety, something healed. Something took flight. Later that evening, long after the speeches and the toasts and the flashbulbs, the three of them sat on the hotel balcony, watching the city lights flicker. Lily curled up between them, half asleep, her head on Ethan's shoulder. Charlotte took his hand. Was that too much? She asked softly. He smiled. It was exactly enough. She looked at him, eyes full of peace. You know, I never imagined a life like this. He kissed her knuckles. Maybe that's because you were meant to build it. One small miracle at a time. She exhaled, leaned into his shoulder. Below them, the city stretched wide. Above them, the stars waited. The morning sun warmed the side of the barn, casting long shadows across the grass. A breeze moved gently through the open field, and the hum of something mechanical echoed softly in the distance. Ethan stood outside the hangar, squinting up at the small aircraft that buzzed above the treetops. It wasn't big, an old Cessna he'd been restoring with Lily over the past few months, but today it was everything. Beside him, Charlotte shaded her eyes, watching the plane soar. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair tied back loosely. No cameras, no speeches, just wind and earth and sky. It's really flying, she whispered. Ethan smiled, his hand resting on the curve of her back. She said it would. Down the field, Lily stood with her sketchbook in hand, drawing the plane she and her father had brought back to life. Her fingers were smudged with pencil, and the tip of her tongue poked from the corner of her mouth in concentration. She's serious about art school, Ethan said quietly. I think she might actually go for it. She will, Charlotte said, because someone taught her how to believe in herself. He looked at her, soft and steady. Not just me. They stood in silence for a while, letting the sky speak. Eventually, Charlotte turned toward him. So, she said, Rachel thinks I've officially lost my mind. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What's the verdict this time? She says I should have accepted the speaking tour, that launching a community aviation center in a town of 2,000 is not a scalable business model. He laughed. She's probably right. Probably, Charlotte agreed. But for the first time, I don't care. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was a blueprint, well-worn, annotated in Charlotte's careful handwriting and Lily's doodles in the margins. It showed the layout of a modest two-story building beside the airfield. A classroom, a workshop, a small museum, and a gallery space. This is going to happen, she said. The Wings of Grace Center for Aviation and Arts. Here, where it started. Ethan took the page from her, studied it. You're really doing this? I'm not doing it for anyone, Archo, she said. I'm doing it with you. He didn't reply right away. Just watched her, really watched her. The way someone watches a sunrise they never thought they'd see again. And then he kissed her, soft, slow, sure. The grand opening happened 3 months later. It wasn't a press event. There were no velvet ropes or influencers, just neighbors, families, students, and one very nervous girl holding a pair of oversized scissors. On three, Charlotte said, crouching beside Lily. Ready? Lily nodded, gripping the handles tightly. 1, 2, 3. The ribbon snapped clean, and the crowd cheered. Inside, the walls were filled with photographs. Smiling students in flight goggles, paintings of paper airplanes, framed notes from donors and letters of gratitude from the first 5 scholarship recipients. At the center of it all was Lily's original crayon drawing, the lady who fell from the sky, now framed behind glass next to a small bronze plaque. Sometimes the smallest kindness can lift us higher than any jet ever could. Ethan stared at the plaque for a long time. Then he leaned down and whispered to Lily, You did this. No, Daddy, she said, slipping her hand into his. We did. That night, after the last of the guests had gone and the sun dipped behind the mountains, the 3 of them sat on the porch of the little farmhouse they now called home. Charlotte curled up beside Ethan, her head resting on his shoulder. Lily lay on the swing bench, snoring softly, a book still open on her chest. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your plane hadn't broken down? Ethan asked. Charlotte smiled. All the time. And I thank the universe every day for faulty gaskets. They chuckled, and then the quiet settled again. But this time, it wasn't the kind of silence that comes from absence or uncertainty. It was the kind that fills a space when everything that needs to be said has already been understood. Charlotte sat up, her voice a little more serious. You know, I used to think love had to be dramatic. Grand gestures, fireworks, speeches. He smiled. You're good at speeches. She nudged him. But real love, the kind that lasts, it's just showing up. Every day. Even when it's hard. Even when it's quiet. He nodded. Especially then. They looked out across the field, where the outline of the new center stood against the moonlit sky. So, Charlotte said after a while, what do we build next? Ethan looked at her, then at the sleeping girl between them. Something that flies, he said. Something that stays. And together, beneath a sky wide enough for second chances, they dreamed of everything still to come. Now that Wings of Grace has come to a close, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? What part of this story touched your heart the most? Drop a comment below. I read everyone, and your thoughts truly mean the world to me. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply brought you a moment of peace, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you know and ensures you won't miss any of the upcoming stories we're preparing just for you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for spending your time here with me. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never stop believing in the quiet power of love.